The NCAA men's college basketball tournament and the National Invitational Tournament have historically had this adversarial relationship. The NCAA has tried on multiple occasions to just destroy the NIT. And the NIT, for its part, has just been like, hey man, we're just over here having some fun. Let us do our own thing. No need for all of that. Then, of course, the NCAA bought out the NIT, and everything has just sort of been water under the bridge since. Of course, the NCAA college basketball tournament and the NIT have not been the only postseason tournament games in town. Over the years, you've seen a smattering of different events crop up here and there. If the NCAA and NIT have been Romulus and Remus fighting over hills and birds, the CBI, the CIT, the National Commissioners Invitational Tournament, the Crown Vegas 16, they're all, I suppose, the other Wolflings that never got mentioned but had to exist for the she-wolf to be lactating enough to provide milk to Romulus and Remus. No one ever puts them in one of those fancy Italian sculptures of Romulus and Remus. Likewise, the other postseason college basketball tournaments never get that much shine. This is a history of those events that exist outside March Madness. I'm not going to call it March Sadness. It's not March Badness. I suppose for the sake of this video, let's just reference it as March Gladness.
CBI was one of the best experiences I've ever had in basketball.
For example, take Idaho and its appearance at the inaugural collegeinsider.com postseason tournament in 2009. After finishing the previous 4 seasons with 8-4-4-8 wins, a 16-14 campaign and third place finish in a fairly solid whack was a breath of fresh air. And this invitation to a newly fangled postseason tournament no one knew much about, the Vandals' first postseason tournament appearance in 19 years, it was something special. I was actually at the Idaho CIT game in 2009. It was moved to Memorial Gymnasium from the Cowan Spectrum because football had already put the turf down in the Kibbe Dome. And once that turf went down, it was curtains for the Cowan Spectrum on the year. The contest against Drake was exciting, even if no one outside of the teams involved in the CIT cared all of that much. Idaho picked up the win against Drake in the first round of the CIT before falling at the second hurdle. Interestingly, though, it is the Vandals who were part of the very first college basketball tournament all the way back in 1922. Let's just say the National Intercollegiate Basketball Tournament was ahead of its time. Sort of like that 1902 Rose Bowl where Michigan was beating Stanford so bad the team decided just to give up in the fourth quarter and a few years later went on to play rugby instead. Okay. That's a gross oversimplification of that timeline of events. However, the football game itself was not ready for prime time and the Rose Bowl wouldn't try football again for some 14 years. It would be some 16 years before the NIT came along and gave postseason college basketball tournament play another chance. So what exactly happened here with the National Intercollegiate Basketball Tournament, or the NIBT, I guess is the acronym here? Well, 6 teams descended upon Indianapolis for a 3-day tournament with travel expenses covered by the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce. A handful of conference champions were invited to join. There was Idaho from the PCC, you had Wabash, Kalamazoo, Illinois Wesleyan, Grove City, and Mercer. The event would have had a little more star power, at least by today's standards, had North Carolina's faculty not put the kibosh on the Tar Heels entry. They beat Mercer for the Southern Regional Championship and submitted an application with NIBT to join the festivities over in Indianapolis, but when faculty found out about the plan, they stepped in and said, absolutely not, you're staying here in Chapel Hill to work on your studies. A similar story also played out over on the campus of Rutgers. Faculty there refused to give the basketball team permission to take part in the new tournament for fear it would lead to the commercialization of college athletics. Oh, 1922 Rutgers faculty, I wish I had access to Doc Brown's lab because have I got some news for you.
It's your kids, Marty. Something has got to be done about your kids.
Wabash would win it all. College basketball became hugely commercialized in the decades that followed that first postseason tournament. However, again, as I said, we would not see another one of these until 1938 with the first ever NIT. This would also be it for non-NCAA tournaments or NIT tournaments all the way until 1974. With the war still simmering between the two sides, the NCAA had sort of backed itself into a corner. It was committed to a single bid per conference model. Only one team from each conference could get into the big dance. However, it didn't want the NIT scooping up all of these really good second place teams for its tournament. The solution was to create their own secondary event, the Collegiate Commissioners Association Tournament. To say this event was unloved would be a huge understatement. The first edition was held in 1974, where a Bobby Knight-led Indiana won the whole damn thing. The issue here? Knight had dedicated a huge amount of time to running down this new tournament to any and everyone who would listen to him. Seriously, every interview about the CCAT that Knight took part in was him calling this some cut-rate event, claiming he would basically be anywhere else in the world. And then during the 1974 final of the CCAT Knight, well, he got himself ejected as only Bobby Knight could. Then in his post-game presser, he goes on to say, "We're stuck here in a consolation tournament, so we also got stuck with consolation officials." He also just completely ignored any sense of accomplishment the team had in winning the first ever CCAT. As for the event itself, despite having all of these so-called big teams, it was a financial flop. Firstly, it was unable to secure a television contract. Second, the paid attendance across 7 games at St. Louis Arena was less than 20,000. Unloved, unwanted, and absolutely despised by the winner, the NCAA decided, what the heck, we're going to try this again. And it gave it a new name, a new location, a fresh coat of paint, and said, well, here we go, it's 1975, let's see what we can do. Now known as the National Commissioners Invitational Tournament, college athletics governing body also managed to get CBS to show games this time around. Drake would go on to beat both USC and Arizona on their way to winning the second tournament held under this format, but with a different name. And it's safe to say the Bulldogs appreciated this victory far more than Bobby Knight and Indiana did. Plans were made for a third edition, but were scrapped when CBS opted against airing the tournament in 1976. In reality, though, changes made by the NCAA to March Madness meant the CCAT or NCIT or whatever you wanted to call it was basically irrelevant. In 75, the NCAA expanded the field to 32 teams and eliminated the rule that stipulated only 1 team per conference could participate. Simply put, the need for a runners-up tournament was now non-existent, with the runners-up participating in the big dance itself. For the next 3 decades, the NCAA tournament ruled the roost while the NIT was just sort of there as a secondary event. In 2005, the NCAA finally just purchases the NIT outright, creating consolidation within the world of college basketball and the postseason. However, this consolidation would create an opportunity. That brings us to 2008 and the launch of the College Basketball Invitational. Quite frankly, this event was somewhat controversial when it first burst onto the scene because it was pay to play. While organizers tried their best to pick good schools, programs worthy of postseason consideration, it does need to be mentioned anyone who wanted to join in on the fun had to fork over cash to do so. In the early years, that total was $50,000, although in more recent editions, that fee has been slashed nearly in half. The reason schools would want to take part in the CBI, why they'd want to spend $50,000 or $27,000 to partake in a postseason college basketball tournament do vary. For some, it's just the ability to host on-campus games. There's a chance to recoup or make back some lost revenue there. For other programs, the visibility of a CBI appearance can be used in recruiting purposes or team building. One of the more notable instances of the CBI's pay-to-play model being used against it in the media came in 2023 and Detroit Mercy. They openly courted the school, whose star player, Antoine Davis, only needed 3 points to beat Pistol Pete Maravich's scoring record. The two sides did have conversations. In fact, the CBI pretty openly courted Detroit Mercy early on. However, it didn't want to risk its credibility and its sort of whatever prestige it may have had and opted against inviting the Titans to the postseason. And let's be honest, the 14-19 Titans had no business being in any postseason college basketball tournament that year. They were only going to be invited so Davis could break the record. All that, by the way, is for naught, because a year later, 2024, the CBI just lets Chicago State, who were 12-18, buy their way into the tournament. That highlights a recent issue for the CBI. It has really struggled to find teams. It's been a 16-team tournament for some time now, but in 2024, they could only get 15 sides to turn up. That included the 12-win Chicago State side. This year's field only had 11 programs in it. Meanwhile, attendances in the hundreds and sometimes the low hundreds do little to inspire confidence that this event is really anything at all. In many ways, you could argue the CBI has lost its way. The most notable change for the event happened post-pandemic, when it went from having home games on campus sites and a best-of-3 championship series to moving all games to Dayton's Ocean Center and a winner-take-all one-game championship. Whatever unique selling points the CBI had are now long gone, and increased competition in the form of college basketball postseason tournaments has also hurt it along the way. That being said, I do give full credit to the CBI. They are a survivor. They have made it all of these years as other postseason tournaments have come and gone, so props for that. 1 year after the CBI was launched, another competitor joined the ranks in the form of the collegeinsider.com postseason tournament, also known as the CIT. Its unique selling point is that it would only feature a field consisting of mid-major programs. That, by the way, was very much in line with the collegeinsider.com branding. The website had made a name for itself, really covering mid-major programs. And if we're being totally honest, every year in college basketball, there are 17, 18, 19, 20 win mid-majors who get left out of the college basketball postseason. This was really filling a need. The early years saw the CIT grow and grow quickly. Eventually, the field ballooned up to 32 teams. One of the things I always appreciated in the early years of this event is that those home crowds were pretty impressive. As I mentioned, Idaho had a big crowd at Mim Gym for a game against Drake in 2009. Even Sac State managed to get a Hornets Nest sellout for a 2015 CIT matchup against NAU. However, as the 2010s progress, the CIT really starts to lose its luster. The field shrinks to 26 programs. You're seeing a lot of potential participants turning down invites to the CIT. The pandemic hits. The 2020 and 2021 editions are just straight up canceled. Then College Insiders, for whatever reason, decides to rebrand the event in 2022, and we will get to that next. Nothing happens in 2023, and the next CIT wouldn't be held until 2024. And that edition was, in a word, awful. For starters, only 9 teams could be bothered to turn up, and those that did accept the invite, well, their fans seemed none too interested in what was happening. Some games, meanwhile, were available on ESPN+, but the final was shown on some really obscure streaming platform. It just was a really bad look. There was some talk of a 2025 tournament taking place, but those plans never came to fruition. It appears that the once really good CIT is officially gone for good. Now, I did mention 2022 when the CIT hosted a rebranded tournament that would be known as the Basketball Classic, and gosh almighty, the Basketball Classic was a disaster. Originally, College Insiders wanted 30 teams to take part, but only 21 were announced. Several then dropped out after that. The most notable example here would be Wolford, who had their first round game canceled because their opponent had issues with COVID-19, so they received a forfeit. They moved on to the second round where they were supposed to play Youngstown State. Apparently, though, the Basketball Classic organizers couldn't provide the school with basic information like when is our game and where is it going to be held, so the school just decided it was better off to remove itself entirely from the situation. Fresno State ends up winning the only Basketball Classic in 2022. Sadly, things have only gone downhill from there for the Bulldogs, who have not had a winning season since. We now turn our attention to Las Vegas. First, we have the Vegas 16, a college basketball tournament that wanted to stylize itself after being a bowl game of sorts. I don't even know how that was supposed to manifest itself, apart from the fact they were just going to play games at a single site in a location that had nice-ish weather. However, they had not done any research, because if they had, they would have known the NCAA had already tried that some 40 years earlier with the CCAT and NCIT, and that failed fairly miserably. Worse yet, the Vegas 16, which was called the Vegas 16 because 16 teams were supposed to take part, only could find 8 teams interested in participating. It turns out that. Locals weren't really interested in seeing not very good programs from not very recognizable conferences play in Vegas. Meanwhile, fans of those schools weren't interested in spending hundreds of dollars on travel to support a mediocre basketball team. It's one thing to ask them to attend a home game, and it's another for them to incur huge expenses. The entire thing scrapped after a single season, yet it very much lives on to this day thanks to the Vegas 16's very oddly active Twitter account. The person who was running that while the tournament existed never had to give up use of it, and he's still out there posting. It's actually pretty good if I'm being totally honest. I mean, for a defunct one-year college basketball tournament Twitter, it is something else. Staying in Vegas, another group is interested in not learning from history. Fox Sports and AEG are teaming up for the College Basketball Crown, a 16-team tournament held exclusively in Las Vegas. They seemingly had issues filling up their bracket with 16 teams, and instead of just inviting less, well, they backfilled with a lot of really bad Big East teams because they have the contract with the Big East, I reckon. I mean, seriously though, 14-19 Butler, 14-19 DePaul are playing for something called the Crown. Get out of here. The only crown needed here is Crown Royal for the fans in the stands watching this hodgepodge of mediocre to bad teams play on consecutive nights. There you have it, the history of the other college basketball postseason tournaments. I will say this, the odd thing about most of these is that for teams, there is certainly some value to taking part in them. Bob Knight hated winning the CCAT, but it gave Indiana experience that would be used on its national title run. The CBI and CIT are full of programs of sides who would go on to reach the big dance a year after taking part in the littler dance. That being said, the novelty of these has very much worn off. Back in the early 2010s, it was really cool to see a lot of these schools who had fairly good seasons that most folks probably hadn't seen at all during the college basketball year go off and face one another's. This, by the way, is also why ESPN Bracket Busters was such a huge deal back then. Now, every college basketball game is seemingly broadcast somewhere. There is no mystery about these teams or the sport at large. Between that and the transfer portal, when most of your roster is likely to leave anyway, these postseason tournaments have lost a lot of value because teams are no longer building for next season. Most importantly, though, with the NCAA thinking about expanding the field of 64 to 72 or 96 or 128 or whatever the case may be, well, I think they need to go have a gander at that field for the college basketball crown because that is freaking Exhibit A on why March Madness does not need to be expanded. Ugh, just brutal. Thank you, though, for watching this video. If you'd like to know the story about the original Big East last hurrah, we'll check out the video in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And for the tale of the University of Washington's very odd first mascot, well, that video is going to be lower left-hand corner of your screen. Until next time, I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.